Syria, once a land of rich history and culture, is now synonymous with conflict and suffering. For over a decade, the nation has been ravaged by a brutal civil war, leaving an indelible scar on its people and its future. The conflict, now in its 13th year, shows no signs of abating, with new fronts opening up and external actors continuing to fuel the flames of violence. The Syrian people are caught in a web of destruction, with their homes destroyed, their families torn apart, and their hopes for a peaceful future fading with each passing day. The international community, despite numerous attempts at mediation and peace talks, has failed to find a lasting solution, leaving Syria trapped in a cycle of violence and despair. This essay delves into the heart of the Syrian conflict, examining the key players, their motivations, and the potential trajectories this devastating war might take. The conflict in Syria is a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the urgent need for a global commitment to dialogue, diplomacy, and the protection of innocent lives. To understand the roots of the Syrian conflict, one must look back to the decades preceding the 2011 uprising. Syria, under the iron grip of the Assad dynasty since 1970, had long been grappling with political repression, economic inequality, and sectarian tension. Hafez al-Assad, the father of current President Bashar al-Assad, ruled with an iron fist, suppressing dissent and consolidating power within his Alawite sect, a minority group within Syria's predominantly Sunni Muslim population. Bashar al-Assad, who inherited the presidency in 2000, initially offered glimmers of hope for reform and liberalization. However, these hopes were quickly dashed as the regime continued its authoritarian practices, stifling political opposition and curtailing basic freedoms. The Arab Spring, which swept across the Middle East and North Africa in 2011, ignited long-simmering grievances within Syria as people took to the streets demanding political change and an end to decades of oppressive rule. The regime's brutal response to these peaceful protests, using live ammunition against demonstrators, marked a turning point. What began as a call for reform quickly escalated into an armed rebellion, plunging Syria into an abyss of conflict and chaos. The Syrian conflict is a tangled web of alliances and rivalries, with a multitude of actors vying for control and influence. Understanding these players and their motivations is crucial to deciphering the complexities of the war. The Syrian government, led by Bashar al-Assad, is determined to maintain its grip on power at all costs, backed by Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah. The regime has shown a ruthless determination to crush the opposition, employing brutal tactics and indiscriminate violence against civilian populations. The Syrian opposition is a fragmented and often fractious collection of groups, ranging from secular and democratic forces to Islamist militants. The main armed opposition group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, formerly known as the Nusra Front, is a powerful jihadist organization controlling territory in Idlib province. The Syrian Democratic Forces, a Kurdish-led militia backed by the United States, has been instrumental in the fight against ISIS but remains at odds with the Turkish government. The Syrian conflict has become a proxy war for regional and international powers, each seeking to advance their own interests. Navigating this complex web of actors and their competing interests is essential to understanding the dynamics of the Syrian conflict and the prospects for any future peace. The recent offensive by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Aleppo has sent shockwaves through the Syrian conflict, raising questions about the potential for a major shift in the balance of power. On November 27, 2024, HTS launched a surprise attack, rapidly seizing control of significant portions of Aleppo, a city that has been a key battleground throughout the war. The speed and ferocity of the HTS advance have taken many by surprise, exposing the vulnerabilities of the Syrian government's defenses and raising concerns about the potential for a resurgence of jihadist power in Syria. The presence of HTS fighters near Aleppo's Old City, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, has heightened fears of further destruction and bloodshed. The battle for Aleppo is far from over, but the HTS offensive has injected a dangerous new dynamic into the Syrian conflict, with the potential to reshape the battlefield and undermine efforts to find a political solution. Section 5. The struggle for resources and influence. Beyond the ideological clashes and power struggles, the Syrian conflict is also fueled by a bitter competition for control of vital resources and strategic influence. Syria, though geographically small, sits at a geopolitical crossroads bordering Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Israel. This strategic location, coupled with its oil and water resources, has made Syria a prize sought after by regional and global powers. While Syria is not a major oil producer, its oil fields concentrated in the eastern part of the country have become a focal point of the conflict. The Syrian government, desperate for revenue to fund its war effort, has sought to maintain control of these oil fields, while Kurdish forces and other armed groups have also vied for control of this lucrative resource. Water scarcity, exacerbated by climate change, has further inflamed tensions in Syria. Control of water resources, particularly the Euphrates River, has become a strategic imperative, leading to disputes and clashes between different factions. Section 6. Why Syria bleeds, unraveling the complexities. The Syrian conflict, now in its 13th year, defies simple explanations. It is a multifaceted crisis with a confluence of factors contributing to its intractability. Authoritarian rule and repression. The Assad regime's decades-long suppression of political dissent, human rights abuses and systematic discrimination against certain segments of the population created a powder keg of resentment and anger, which the Arab Spring ignited. Sectarian tensions. Syria's diverse religious and ethnic makeup, while historically a source of strength, has been exploited and inflamed by the conflict. The Assad regime, dominated by the Alawite sect, has been accused of playing on sectarian fears to divide the opposition and consolidate its power. Foreign intervention and proxy warfare. The influx of foreign fighters, weapons and funding has transformed the Syrian conflict into a proxy war, with regional and international powers pursuing their own agendas and exacerbating the violence. The collapse of governance. The Syrian state, once a pillar of stability in the region, has been hollowed out by the conflict, leaving a vacuum of authority and basic services. Section 7. The uncertain future paths and consequences. Predicting the future of the Syrian conflict is a perilous exercise, but several potential scenarios and their implications can be outlined. Protracted conflict. The most likely scenario is a continuation of the current stalemate, with no clear victor emerging and the conflict grinding on for years to come. This would mean continued suffering for the Syrian people, further destruction of the country's infrastructure, and the risk of the conflict spilling over into neighboring countries. Negotiated settlement. While dim, the possibility of a negotiated settlement cannot be entirely ruled out. This would require major concessions from all sides, a commitment to power sharing, and international guarantees to enforce any agreement, fragmentation and partition. The Syrian state could further fragment along sectarian or ethnic lines, leading to de facto partition of the country. This scenario would likely result in new conflicts over resources and territory, and could exacerbate regional instability. Section 8. A nation in ruins, the human cost. The human cost of the Syrian conflict is almost beyond comprehension. Millions of Syrians have been displaced from their homes, seeking refuge in neighboring countries or living in precarious conditions within Syria. The United Nations estimates that over 13 million people inside Syria are in need of humanitarian assistance. The war has had a devastating impact on Syria's infrastructure, destroying hospitals, schools, and homes. The economy lies in ruins, and basic services such as healthcare and education have been decimated. The war has created a lost generation of Syrian children, their futures uncertain, and their dreams shattered. Section 9. A call for peace and justice. The Syrian conflict is a stain on the conscience of humanity. The international community must redouble its efforts to find a peaceful resolution to the conflict, one that addresses the root causes of the war and ensures justice for the victims, end the violence. All parties to the conflict must cease hostilities and engage in meaningful dialogue to find a political solution. External actors must stop fueling the conflict with arms and funding. Accountability for crimes. Those responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity must be held accountable. Justice and reconciliation are essential for lasting peace. Humanitarian assistance. The international community must provide sustained and unhindered humanitarian assistance to those in need inside Syria and support neighboring countries hosting Syrian refugees. The Syrian people deserve peace, justice, and a future free from fear and violence.